Thanks, Gordon. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and is within the territory of Dish with One Spoon Treaty.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we're about to go through the following project: Downsview Taxiway West District, 123 Garratt Boulevard. And I believe this is the first time that this part of the project has come to the panel. It has come in a larger sort of overall master plan perspective, but now we're starting to get into some of the key parts of the vision for Downsview. And this is a zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision application, as well as I mentioned, the first time that we're reviewing it. We've given an hour and 40 minutes scheduled for this review. It is a formal review session, and there will be a vote taken at the end. And the way we have it set up, we have allowed 12 minutes for the city staff team to make their presentation, 20 minutes for the applicant to give their presentation, and then the city staff will take 3 minutes after that to highlight issues of design focus, and then we'll move on to questions of clarification, and then panel discussion. We have 40 minutes set aside for panel discussion. This is an important project, and we're giving it the due amount of time to review it. And then I'll do a summary at the end, and then we will hold our vote. So first of all, what I'm going to do is call attendance for panel members. And if I call out your name, you can just confirm that you're here and whether you have any conflict of interest. And we'll start with Meg.
Present, no conflict.
Thanks, Meg. Heather.
Here and no conflict.
Thank you, Heather. Michael.
Present and no conflict.
Thanks, Michael. Jim.
I'm here, no conflict.
Thank you, Jim. Ralph. Is Ralph here? At the moment, no. Okay, I'll move on. Paul.
Present, no conflict.
Okay, and have I missed any panel members? Hearing none. Great. Then what we'll do is we'll move on to the city staff presentation, and I'll give you a moment to bring it up on the screen. And then once you're ready to go, it'll be a total of 12 minutes, and I will gently butt in at the 11th minute to tell you you've got a minute left. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I can.
Perfect.
Great.
My name is Sophie Knowles, and I am a senior planner with community planning in North York District. I am joined by my colleague PC Wasserman, senior planner in urban design, and we are also supported today by Frank Defay from transportation planning, who is here with us to listen and answer any questions as needed. Taxiway West District is located in the Downsview secondary plan area within the former Downsview Airport lands. The district is situated approximately 400 meters north of Wilson Avenue and 1.2 kilometers west of Allen Road. The district has been defined by its contribution to Canadian aviation innovation and manufacturing. Aviation manufacturing uses began in the district in the 1950s with de Havilland Canada, and in 1985, de Havilland Canada was sold to Boeing, and shortly after, the lands were sold to Bombardier in the 1990s. The Bombardier Aviation Facility has used the site until the spring of this year, when the Downsview Airport was formally decommissioned. The site is now available for new uses and redevelopment under the current ownership of Northcrest. The district is bordered by the Barrie GO Transit Rail Corridor and Downsview Park to the west, a mix of institutional and recreational uses to the north, the taxiway and runway to the east, and the Ancaster Residential Neighborhood Flight Safety Training Center and City of Toronto Works Yard to the south. The district is 40.9 hectares in size, or approximately 101 acres, and consists of the former Bombardier campus hangars, offices and ancillary structures, surface parking, and a portion of the Downsview Airport Taxiway. Taxiway West District is subject to the Downsview Secondary Plan and associated study deliverables that were adopted by Council earlier this year. The Taxiway West District Plan has developed in parallel with the secondary plan and ties in with its vision. The following slides will briefly go over how the secondary plan influences the design of the district. The Downsview Secondary Plan fixes major parks, major streets, greenways, planned mobility connections, and rail crossings, and the signature taxiway and 2.1-kilometer runway POPs at the secondary plan scale. The secondary plan identifies connections through Taxiway West District, including an active-only bridge to Downsview Park, a greenway, and a public realm mobility connection to the taxiway and major park to the northeast, which is being realized in the district plan as Taxiway Street. The secondary plan provides for the local public realm network, including parks and local streets, to be defined through the district planning process. With respect to land use designations in Taxiway West include general employment areas, institutional areas, and mixed-use areas. Downsview Secondary Plan consists of 15 districts, of which Taxiway West is the first to develop in the context of the updated Downsview Secondary Plan. This district contains an historic aircraft manufacturing campus, which is made up of hangars, offices, ancillary structures, open spaces for aircraft circulation, and a portion of the aircraft taxiway. Heritage planning staff have researched and evaluated the site and have identified 5 structures that contain cultural heritage value, which are shown in purple. These structures will be refurbished and adapted to accommodate a range of new institutional, employment, retail, entertainment, and community uses, while continuing to contribute to the district's heritage character. The population phasing map on the left shows that Taxiway West is within the first phase of redevelopment. And Taxiway West is assigned a maximum gross floor space index of 1.2, which is lower than most of the other districts. This lower density is because of the district's employment uses, large existing hangar buildings, and the location furthest from rapid transit. In total, the district proposes to accommodate approximately 491,000 square meters of employment, residential, retail, community, and institutional uses, including 289,450 square meters of non-residential gross floor area, supporting around 7,600 jobs, and providing new housing for approximately 5,200 new residents in 2,880 dwelling units. Community amenities include 1,680 square meters for a daycare and community agency space, 1.32 hectares of public parkland, and 1.06 hectares of POPs, or privately owned, publicly accessible space. This slide presents the timeline of the Taxiway West District Plan in context with the updated Downsview Secondary Plan. The process began in 2020 with an owner-led visioning and official plan amendment application, leading to the launch of a city-led Downsview Secondary Plan study in late 2021, and the applicant initiated Taxiway West District Plan application in 2022. As you can see, the Taxiway West District process has run parallel to the secondary plan, influencing the overall design, built form, and public realm. And over these years, there have been many conversations and meetings with staff, workshops, and public consultation with numerous stakeholders, Indigenous groups, Black and other equity-deserving groups, and neighboring communities to help shape the vision. At this stage, we are at the 3rd submission, and we are expecting one final submission prior to reporting to Council, targeting the 2nd quarter of 2025. This slide illustrates the evolution of the application. Initially, the first two district plan submissions included a site plan application for a film studio in the North Subdistrict, which is shown in white. But that proposal was withdrawn, and as a result, the current third submission provides the first full assessment of the Taxiway district, and the corresponding draft plan of subdivision and rezoning applications have been updated to now include the entire district. Throughout this process, city staff and the applicant refined the design through workshops and discussions, focusing on key aspects such as public versus private streets, open space locations, building heights, and the relationship to heritage resources. As mentioned, this application seeks a zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision approval to implement the Taxiway West District Plan. And in addition, the final deliverables to City Council will include the district plan and district level urban design guidelines. So this concludes the staff overview, and I will now hand the floor over to Emily Reisman to kick off the applicant presentation, and then PC Wasserman will follow to introduce today's issues for design focus.
Great, thanks very much, Sophie. Now we're going to move on, as mentioned, to the proponent presentation. And you'll have a total of 20 minutes, the 19-minute mark. I'll just remind you that you have a minute left, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. So good afternoon, members of the panel and staff colleagues. My name is Emily Reisman. I'm a partner at Urban Strategies. I'm here with my partner, Michelle Drachme, and Senior Associate Lauren Hainan on behalf of the Taxiway West team that also includes Perkins Eastman, DTAH, Trophic Design, Garratt, and WSP. Also on the call today are representatives from Northcrest, Peter Malaganowski, and Arlen Hack. Today we are pleased to provide you with an overview of the Taxiway West District that has been the product, as you have already heard, of much work together with staff since the original applications were filed in 2022. The Taxiway West District Plan is, as you've heard, the first district to be developed under the new secondary plan. And this district plan was initiated even as the secondary plan was being refined, which was an intentional overlap discussed with staff to allow the secondary plan policy to evolve with an understanding of what level of detail would appropriately be associated with subsequent district plans. In addition, there was and is a shared ambition with staff to activate one of the main employment centers associated with the secondary plan as early as possible. As a result, the district plan, as you've heard, is on its third submission after many fruitful and robust discussions with staff across many different departments, disciplines, and with various interested parties. The district plan, as you've heard, will be implemented through our applications for a plan of subdivision, and a neighborhood scale zoning bylaw. Urban design guidelines were also developed as part of the application. And importantly, these instruments represent planning at a scale of several neighborhoods, as the district is over 100 acres or 40.9 hectares. Today, we'll give you an overview of the entire district plan with a focus on that North Subdistrict, which, as has been mentioned, is new to this submission to address the areas of design focus that staff have identified. At over 100 acres, the district is one of the largest in the secondary plan area. It's also one of the only ones to immediately abut the existing Ancaster neighborhood, and has extensive existing assets in the Bombardier hangars and related buildings that are largely proposed to be retained. These buildings are among several on the broader Downsview property that will continue to reflect the area's aviation history and usher in a new era of innovation as the buildings are reused. Beyond the district boundaries, the context is varied, with the emerging Downsview secondary plans to the east, the suburban Ancaster neighborhood to the south, Downsview Park and the Stanley Green neighborhood to the west, although the district is currently disconnected from those lands by the GO rail line. As has been mentioned, the district plan and secondary plan were developed concurrently, and the core design concepts for the district were conceived of even earlier during the landowner's framework plan process, in order to be ready to activate this part of the site as soon as possible. The secondary plan establishes the main organizing features for the overall evolution of the lands, purposely locating major streets and parks along the runway spine, and identifying connecting greenways and connections to Downsview Park and links to the taxiway within this district in particular. The district plan is designed to express 5 complementary themes: Taxiway West will be a vibrant and thriving employment hub, a home to technology, creative industries that bring new jobs and economic opportunities, a highly walkable, pedestrian-centered community with new connections to Downsview Park, local transit service, and lively parks and public spaces, providing new mid-rise and low-rise housing across the spectrum of affordability that transitions thoughtfully to existing neighborhoods, and a low-carbon community that promotes healthy and active living and is an environmentally sensitive place that's welcoming to all. To implement those ambitions, we have to recognize and embrace some of the existing assets and secondary plan directions that will start to shape the plan. And you've heard many of these already. The importance of the hangars and the other associated structures as identified heritage resources, the direction from the secondary plan to make pedestrian connections to Downsview Park, and to create an extension of the taxiway. The fact that nearly half of the district is designated as an employment area and another third or so is designated institutional, and recognizing that the mixed-use portion of the district in particular abuts the Ancaster neighborhood. So to implement the framework plan concepts and the secondary plan policies while achieving that district vision and responding to the existing conditions, the team developed the district plan around these big moves. Embracing city nature in as many places as possible. City nature is a concept that evolved through the framework plan process that seeks to deliberately integrate the built and natural environments for access to nature, active mobility, biodiversity, and resilience. Building on those legacy assets, over 1.8 million square feet of them, creating a fine grain of connections that's consistent with many former industrial districts and provides appropriate connections to the surrounding network, defining several character areas that help to break up the large district, introducing many special places throughout, and distributing height and density in response to context. And all of that comes together in the district plan. And we will go through a few of the features, but as you see in this district at a glance view, one thing to note is that the aviation legacy and orientation of the district around the extension of the taxiway in particular provides benefits that would be different if it just attached itself to the typical Toronto grid. In particular, the benefits come from a thermal comfort perspective. The prevailing winter winds in this part of the city come from the north and west. And so the existing buildings and new buildings along that 45-degree orientation of Taxiway Street mean that the key pedestrian spaces along there and others are sheltered from those winter winds, extending in particular the shoulder seasons for pedestrian comfort. We'll show you an overview of the open space, mobility, and community systems that form part of the district plan. But I first wanted to share that sustainability and resilience are not just separate layers. Rather, they are built into each aspect of the district plan, including the following features: adaptive reuse of over 1.8 million square feet of existing space, a truly mixed-use district supporting active and transit modes of travel and reducing external trip making, nature-based stormwater management that's built into streets, blocks, and open spaces as a cohesive system, greenways and other open spaces which support biodiversity and increased tree canopy, targeting minimum TGS Tier 2 for new buildings, and new buildings proposed to be fossil fuel-free. So we start with open space. And that's important given that the density and land use are largely set by the secondary plan. The district plan is really about organizing the space to turn those elements into a real place. And so it's appropriate to start with public realm and open space in general. And the district plan, as you've heard, delivers a total of 3.2 hectares of new parks and open spaces that respond to the directions from the secondary plan, in particular for establishing a link to the taxiway open space that will be part of an adjacent district to the northeast, to connect to Downsview Park, and respond to the retained hangar structures and range of uses. The open space network reflects an equitable distribution of parks and open spaces that complement the scale and distribution of open spaces in the broader secondary plan area and adjacent areas. It also addresses secondary plan policies for the inclusion of POPs, mid-block connections, and greenways, that fine-grained street network, and maintaining the new corridor along the former taxiway between the taxiway open space in the adjacent district and the south hangars that is highlighted by the park in front. And now Michelle will tell you more about how these open spaces, features, and shape the overall plan.
Thanks, Emily. So I'm going to begin by taking you through some of the key open spaces within the Taxiway district, which are really meant to complement the mix of open spaces, which Emily just covered in its immediate context. These range in scale and are a distribution of parks and POPs designed for seamless public use and enjoyment. The key ones we'll explore now are the plaza located along the Taxiway, Downsview Park Bridge, which extends over the rail corridor, Central Square, and Garratt Boulevard Park. Taxiway Street will be the district's central pedestrian and retail spine. We've been working closely with city staff on this and look forward to getting into more detail when we get into site plan design. This will be a private street carefully designed and managed to support a variety of functions and events, including temporary closures for special celebrations. It will be a busy place with pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles, with retail and open spaces along its length. As Emily mentioned, Taxiway Street is oriented perpendicularly to prevailing winter winds, supporting an ideal environment for pedestrian comfort in the entire village. It'll be framed on both sides by mid-rise buildings with shops and uses that animate the street. This view, looking north with the plaza on the right, highlights the primary pedestrian character of the street, including outdoor seating. Comfortable microclimate conditions will extend its use throughout the shoulder seasons. This cross-section and axonometric view further illustrate this community shared street identity, reinforced by a curbless design with lanes for vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians, as well as pedestrian-only zones on either side. The intention is to accommodate all users while prioritizing active pedestrian and cyclist mobility. Large landscape zones along the street will support stormwater management. The midsection of the Taxiway Street opens up at the plaza and ends at the central square in front of the South Hangars. At its north end, the street will be anchored by a future major park in the Taxiway East District and Street B Greenway. Here's another view of the street with the plaza on the left. Again, a focus on pedestrian scale supported by active uses year-round in a carefully managed environment. Downsview Park Bridge. This is another key feature of the plan, providing a much-needed community link. During various rounds of community engagement, we heard a lot about the desire for a direct connection to Downsview Park. Because of the rail line, it can take over 30 minutes to walk from Ancaster neighborhood to the park, which is frustratingly visible, yet just out of reach. This view, looking west towards the rail corridor, highlights the bridge as a destination in its own right, a generously landscaped 20 to 30 meter wide linear open space, offering views of Downsview Park towards the west and the city from its peak towards the south over the rail corridor. Here's another view of the bridge captured from its entrance at the landing park. The Central Square Park, located in front of the South Hangars, will be a key community gathering space, animated by uses along the Taxiway, as well as uses within the hangars. Garratt Boulevard Park is the largest within this district, located at the heart of the Ancaster West character area. This neighborhood park will be framed by mid-rise buildings and will play an important double role as a stormwater management element. The mobility network prioritizes active transportation. The yellow spines in this plan highlight the public streets, and you can see the Taxiway Street highlighted in blue. The red dotted lines highlight dedicated cycle lanes. Surface transit connections have been carefully considered in order to make active transportation and transit attractive, minimizing the need for car trips. This is how it all comes together with a true mix of uses in a contextual built form that respects the scale of the hangars, integrates into the existing Ancaster neighborhood, and frames the taxiway street. The district is defined by 4 character areas. The south hangars to be reused for a variety of non-residential uses within an institutional designation. The village, the mixed-use heart of the districts aligned along the taxiway and embracing Bay 12, another one of the hangars, the Ancaster West primary residential district, and the employment designated North subdistrict. The blocks have been designed to manage parking, loading, and access from secondary frontages and lanes away from the main public streets. Views are considered along the taxiway to the hangars and from Downsview Park Bridge. The South Hangars will be reimagined as a place of innovation and growth. Here's an interior view of the primary atrium space within the South Hangars, an internal spine which extends from Central Square Park. And here's another view of those same South Hangars. This view illustrates Street B, framed by the reimagined South Hangars on the left and new mixed-use buildings on the right. Another existing building, which we'll see reuse, is Bay 12, a separate hangar seen here with the Taxiway Plaza in the foreground. A range of community and cultural uses are envisaged. Today, Bay 12 is already welcoming the public at Northcrest Experience Center. And I'll pass it back to Emily.
So as we've mentioned, the taxiway's unique combination of land uses, as shown here, based on the secondary plan, make it a truly mixed-use place. And this also influences the distribution of density and built form across the area, as Sophie alluded to. In terms of built form, the secondary plan identifies this area for 1.2 times gross density, and that is illustrated by the district plan, taking into account the fact that the hangars make up a significant amount of the land area and that employment designated areas are typically delivered at lower density than mixed use areas. With that in mind, this is a mid-rise district with the greatest heights proposed towards the east, towards the future Taxiway East district, which will have buildings of a similar scale, and then lower buildings generally to the south. 14 stories are indicated at the eastern gateway to Taxiway Street, and these blocks are adjacent to the broadest open areas fronting onto Street B and a future major park. More modest mid-rise forms line the rest of Taxiway Street up to 11 stories, while buildings adjacent to Ancaster are in the 5 to 8 story range, as well as several townhouse blocks for appropriate transition. This is a view of local streets K and L in that predominantly mid-rise mixed-use village character area at the heart of the district, which further refine the grain perpendicular to Taxiway Street. And in this view, we see how Ancaster West is made up of that mix of mid-rise residential buildings and townhouses to provide a transition in height to the existing neighborhood. And now we'll focus a little bit on the North Subdistrict, which, as you've heard, has evolved from the original application, which assumed that the entirety of this area would be a single film studio. As that application has been set aside, this employment district now provides an opportunity to integrate with the adjacent character areas, but still needs to ensure appropriate flexibility in order to attract the wide range of uses that are contemplated in the secondary plan, including the use of large blocks and the need for surface parking and to accommodate truck traffic. So we've extended Street B through the village area, or on the edge of the village area, up to meet the future Downsview Park Boulevard. And along the east side of that is a 10-meter wide greenway. There's also a greenway proposed along the south side of this district along Street A. We've also included the triangular Hanover Green to further buffer the employment district from the mixed-use areas to the south, or to the mixed-use areas to the south. The proposed plan of subdivision and zoning would allow for several build-out approaches depending on the nature of the uses, users, or industries that may be attracted to locate here. And we've illustrated some of those on the screen. Despite that necessary flexibility at a zoning level, the proposed urban design guidelines include many areas of guidance that apply across the district, in addition to within the employment area. providing guidance on materiality, fenestration, roofs, etc., which would be applicable at the site plan application stage. And before concluding, we would like to convey how proud the team is to be bringing this forward under the new secondary plan. But we also wanted to share that with all the work ahead of us, we are not waiting. North Crest has already been activating the site, and this area in particular, with activities in the South Hangars and in Bay 12, that experience center Michelle mentioned, and many outdoor activities on the adjacent lands. And we encourage you to make a trip up there when you have the chance. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for the presentation. We're going to move back now to the city staff team, and you are going to walk us through some of the issues of design focus.
Hi, I'm PC Busman, a senior urban designer working with Sophie on the Taxiway West District from the city. I will be taking the team through some of the issues of design focus. So just before we start on the specific questions that we have for the panel, we'd like to request that the design focus on the panel is on the area between the north and south sub-districts. We would like design input on integration between these two different land use areas, as was explained in the presentation prior. We wanted to ask questions that would allow us to leverage the DRP's comments to assist staff with the deliverables, these being the draft plan, the zoning bylaw, the district plan, and the urban design guidelines. So with the first question, what should the design of Downsview Park Bridge take into consideration on the ground floor or the street level interface of Street J? In other words, what makes for a successful space next to this bridge? This is important. This is a very important east-west pedestrian connection route from Stanley Green and Downsview Park, moving through the north and south hangars, leading across the district to other central areas of the Downsview secondary plan area. Detailed design and engineering have not yet been done, and therefore we would like to ask for some ideas and concepts on designs and opportunities to deal with this unique space. In other words, how can the design of Downsview Park Bridge ensure a lively edge and interface with the street? Here's just some more imagery, also similar to that that the applicant has been presenting. Moving on to the second question. How can greenways and privately owned, publicly accessible spaces, otherwise known as POPs, and parks along Street A contribute to the broader parks and public realm network? So how can these two parks, the two parks announced Landing Park and Hanover Green, how can these two parks announce the entrances to the employment lands in the north sub-district and the Downsview Park Bridge as gateways? And what might these announcements be? Might it be wayfinding, public art, interface conditions? There's some more imagery for discussion purposes of Landing Park and Hanover Green. Moving on to the third question, what guidance can you provide to inform the design of the interface of new development adjacent to the east-west greenway along Street A? We'd like to ask for some guidance with regard to the relationship between the mid-rise and the larger employment buildings, the scale of uses and articulation with regard to that. Currently, the employment uses are unknown in the northern portion, and the built form in the Taxiway East District, the future district, is also unknown. Please note that some of these zoning types allowed in this district would permit for a broad array of different employment uses beyond just industrial uses. The draft zoning bylaw permits 4 to 8 stories for development in the north sub-district and 4 to 15 stories for the mid-rise in the section of the sub-district below. Moving on to the fourth and final question. So the Taxiway Street is a signature public realm element in the district plan that provides visual and multimodal connections between the South Hangar buildings with Central Square and the taxiway and runway beyond in adjacent districts. The street will provide vehicular circulation, some lay-by parking, a robust landscape zone, and generous pedestrian realm. The nature of the street as a private street provides some flexibility and opportunity for creative approaches to support a special character. So therefore, what are some suggestions that a future detailed design process should include to ensure the successful this as a successful public space? As with the Downsview Park Bridge, the detailed design of the taxiway street will progress when implementing the district, and a lot of design work and thinking has gone into this public realm move, as mentioned previously, and certain elements for the street, will be required. And I mean, these include very general things such as street furniture, lighting, signage, wayfinding, all those kind of elements, right? So we just like some feedback in terms of that. So we're looking forward to hearing the panel's feedback, and thank you very much for us being able to present today.
Great, thank you.
I then, sorry, Chair, I just have a slide also then just summarizing the questions.
Okay, very
if you'd
quickly.
like me to keep this up.
Yes, please. That'd be great. Thank you. We're going to move on now to questions of clarification. These are intended for panel members to ask questions of clarification to either the proponent team and or the city team. And if you could just raise your virtual hand, I'll keep track, and we'll make our way through the questions. So I see Heather, if you want to go first, that'd be great.
Great, thank you. Just a quick question about the proposed bridge. It appears to be solid on both sides, save and except where the trains go underneath. I appreciate that it's early days and the bridge hasn't been engineered, but it would be great to hear a little bit more of a description about that. It's hard to tell from the renderings. I thought at first that the planting was actually, sort of raised with the bridge, like a kind of high line idea, but it appears in the section that it's on the ground. So that would be good to know. I also had a couple of detailed questions about the document. I'm not sure if we can go to that, but on the aerial on page 28, within the Ancaster neighborhood, there looks to be right abutting this this area. It's not a house. It looks like maybe a light industrial use. I would just love to know what that is. And then on some of the diagrams that are provided, it seems that the taxiway street is not continuous as it continues to go up diagonally to the east. It looks like in some of the block plans, the taxiway is interrupted. And I'm just wondering if in the full build out, will this be a very clear, diagonal that ends in public spaces at both ends?
Okay, who from the proponent side could provide some answers?
So why don't I start with your first question about the bridge? Mm-hmm. You used a comparison to the High Line, and without having gone into any detailed design, that is a bit of an aspiration, certainly a precedent that everybody's been talking about, without necessarily wanting to replicate it mm-hmm. completely. But in the views that you've seen, the idea is that it will be a 20 to 30 meter wide bridge that, as it leads up towards the portion that crosses the GO corridor itself, will be wide enough and have sufficient soil depth to support all kinds of plantings. Of course, once it becomes a real bridge over the GO line, it will change in its nature and character and be an opportunity to be more of a almost viewing platform looking towards the northwest towards Downsview Park and towards the southeast towards the city skyline. So it'll have a different presence, a different feel because of the lack of vegetation on the short span of the bridge itself. So I hope that answers that question. I'm going to jump to a second question, and I think, or why don't Emily, you cover the second question?
Sure. On slide 28, Heather, I think you were referring to an area that is outside the taxiway district, and that's lands that are not owned by Northcrest.
Yes.
Currently occupied by an operation called Flight Safety International. They do flight training out of that facility there.
Oh.
So it's within the secondary plan boundary, but not within this district
Mhm.
plan.
Okay. All right. Because I just noticed that I was asking because you've got additional height in some of the areas that just back onto that. It's obviously not residential. So I just had a burning question of what that was. So thank you.
And then your third question was about whether or not the taxiway would appear to be continuous. And the short answer is yes. So
Okay.
the taxiway will be an open space element in the remainder of the secondary plan to the east. It's taxiway street within the district
Mhm.
plan. And it's anchored on both sides. The taxiway street is anchored on both sides by open spaces, by the central square within this
Mhm.
district plan, and by a major park in the adjacent district.
Yeah. Could you go to page 12? It was the diagram on the left most of that page that was causing me to ask the question. Yeah, page 12. Did I say 22? Maybe I did. I
Actually,
don't
sorry,
remember.
I've got a consolidated version here, Heather, so I apologize.
Oh,
That's
okay.
You see, it's 24 on your version.
24. Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so if you zoom in on the one on the left there, it really becomes like it's apparent that it's a street, definitely in I guess you can't zoom in. Anyway, it's okay. It's definitely a clear street that ends with the open plaza, but outside of the red line going up to the east, it's just blasting through blocks, and it just doesn't look like anything. Actually, it looks more like a kind of desire line. So I just was curious about it. That's all. If it's something that's going to be kind of resolved later, that's fine. But it just was confusing to me. That's all.
The intention through the secondary plan is that there is an open space that generally follows the existing alignment of the taxiway, but those details would be sorted out in future district planning.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both. We're going to move on to Ralph and then Paul. Ralph, are you there? You may be muted.
There. Yeah, sorry about that.
There you are. Okay.
Just going beyond the lines a little bit. Can somebody just explain Block O building? I know it's not in the mixed use district, but it is kind of adjacent to two parks that we're talking. Some of the questions are about, and it looks very specific in its kind of massing. Is there some idea of what that ambition is for that specific building? That's it. That's my question.
None of the buildings are designed at this stage, so the concept plan you see is just an expression of one way that things may build out. So the specificity, don't read anything into the specificity. The reason that there is a generous setback from that northern boundary is because Downsview Park Boulevard, oh, is that Block O? Oh, I'm sorry, thinking about the wrong block. My apologies, Ralph. It's located there as a bit of a transition building between the big hangar, the north hangar building that's retained, and the uses that are going to be happening in the village area. We've described how the angle of the taxiway creates great opportunities for extending the shoulder seasons in public realm, but it does mean that the streets have to do some interesting things to tie into the grid. And so that building helps to, or that block effectively helps to provide that transition in the grid. No specific buildings are proposed at this stage. It's just an illustration of something that could be expressed on that proposed parcel.
Does that answer your question, Ralph?
Sorry, but it is meant to be employment use only.
Okay. All right. We'll move on next to Paul and then Michael.
I think my question kind of maybe builds a little bit off that point, I guess. I'm struggling a little bit to just understand the hierarchy, and I appreciate you guys want to sort of protect some flexibility for future uses and stuff. And normally, if we've got a regular street grid, you can kind of read between the lines and kind of move to a conventional thing. But I'm struggling here given the kind of unconventional geometry and stuff. So I'm wondering if you could maybe walk through a little bit. I'm just trying to understand where's the backs and the fronts of the building sort of thing. Is there an idea of where the active retail and where the loading goes? And then maybe how that relates to the various parks and open spaces, and especially that sort of central park. That's the kind of the grand terminus of the taxiway. It's going to be the kind of the big view. And if there's any sort of more specificity about what happens around those edges and how that could work.
So if we can zoom in maybe on the plan on the right, in terms of the village, if you will, the primary frontages are Street D, which is the interface with the existing hangars, which are being repurposed, and of course the taxiway street. The other frontages are also important: Street A, Street B, the other ones, and equally important, as Emily illustrated in that one view, is a narrower nature of streets K and L. But streets K and L are also serving purposes as laneways, as access to some of the parking and servicing. And then within the blocks that are being illustrated, around the taxiway, those blocks are actually quite large, and so they can accommodate a lot of that supportive infrastructure within them, with minimal openings to their external frontages. So, Paul, I'm not sure if that answers your question, or if you had specific blocks you wanted to zero in on.
Yeah, I think that helps. Maybe just the second part is if you could talk a little bit about I think it's called the central square, the terminus of the taxiway, and sort of what its maybe land use or programming around it, and then the character of that square might be.
Okay. So, first of all, we've spent a lot of time describing the activities along the taxiway street, and the fact that it's going to be, a very carefully managed environment. The actual square, and this is the view of it looking towards the repurposed hangar, will have an internal street, if you will, that also has a lot of different activities bringing life to it. And so the square is almost at the intersection of a number of key spines. It's at the intersection of the taxiway, it's at the intersection of that internal spine, and then it's at the intersection of the north-south street along the south hangars, which extends south from the square to the existing neighborhood, to the Garratt Boulevard Park. So it's really at the hub, if you will, of a number of very active environments and a mix of different uses, including the Ancaster neighborhood, including the village and the hangars.
If I could just add that we anticipate, there's a range of uses that could be in the south hangars. Those lands are designated institutional, which can also accommodate some retail and commercial, and that the edges there would be those public facing type of uses within that adaptively reused building.
Yeah. And also, we shouldn't underestimate the impact of the Downsview Park Bridge. A considerable amount of footfall to and from that will be extending then south and bringing again that life to that square.
Does that answer your question, Paul? Yes. Oh, you're maybe on mute.
Sorry, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I hoped my vigorous nodding could get through, but yes, thank you.
Sorry about that. Michael.
Very simple question, and which has to do with the overall connectivity to the very generous parklands, Park Commons and Downsview Park to the north and northwest. Downsview Park Boulevard extension appears on the drawing and seems to go, I'm assuming, under the tracks to then become Downsview Park Boulevard, or the south end of Downsview Park. Is that, I'm looking at a drawing here. It's the drawing that shows the overall neighborhood, and it's got your proposed development, the excerpt from two documents. So it's a few pages ahead of where you are now. In any event,
The framework plan.
yeah, just one slide above that. Oops, is it there?
The short answer to your question is yes. Downsview Park Boulevard will go under the rail corridor in this location. And so part of the relationship to the north is about understanding where that grade change happens, that it's not a typical street along its length, because there will be an underpass condition generally happening after the location where Street D connects.
Okay, so in other words, there's an explicit intent to have both the pure pedestrian crossing as well as vehicular crossing to manage the GO transit line. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. I have just a couple of questions. The north and south hangars, it's great that they're being retained. Just to clarify, do you anticipate any uses taking place on their roofs? Any amenities, any particular use that would happen on the roofs themselves?
At this stage, there are a number of different ideas inherently because of their extensiveness. I think there are lots of interesting, green roofs or other more intensive uses that have been discussed in the project team. We anticipate that will come forward in more detailed site plan stages as these buildings are actually designed. One key consideration, Gordon, is that these hangar structures, like the loads that they're able to take, is not something that is very well understood at this high level. Of course, by the virtue of them being hangars and not having a lot of beams that drop so that large airplanes could be built underneath, means that the roofs might not be able to take much structural load. So that's something that continues to be explored, and we'll have more details at site plan stages.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is, within those big footprints of the hangars, do you anticipate any gardens, any indoor parks, and just to sort of get a clearer picture of the overall network or tendrils of green space, both inside and out?
It's not a green space specifically that's anticipated within the south hangars, but as Michelle mentioned, a key move is to create effectively a publicly accessible atrium running east-west, largely from the end of the taxiway through to the west side of that hangar. And some of the views we've shown you demonstrate what that possibly could look like. But it's not anticipated as a, there you go, as a park necessarily.
Yeah, but you can see in this image that there is an aspiration to bring in some natural light. Again, this all needs to be worked out in detail in terms of how the roof can be adaptively reused or to integrate skylights and things of that nature. But that would be an ambition. And then with that light, the opportunity for some greenery.
Okay, thank you very much. Michael, you have your hand up still. Do you have any other questions?
Forgot to put it down. Thank you.
Oh, that's okay. Great. All right. So now we're going to move on to panel member commentary. And I think we will start in have the following order of speakers: Ralph, Heather, Paul, Meg, Jim, and Michael. So Ralph, if you'd like to kick off, keep in mind, I'd say And bear with me here for just a second. I'd say give, say, 5 to 6 minutes per person's self-managed time. Okay, over to you, Ralph.
Thank you, Gordon. If you don't mind, I'm going to just start by saying a tour de force. Like, it is so enthralling, a document so enthralling, neighborhood to be. I commend everybody involved. It is truly, truly unique opportunity. And as much as I think we've seen the Downsview master plan, this kind of corner of it is really special. And I'm so excited about the potential. It's almost like there's almost too many wonderful things happening here. And so it is really quite interesting. I commend everybody to kind of take what is a kind of awkward conditions and make them really special. It kind of reminds me of a kind of almost medieval plan approach to urban design, and in as much as that completely goes against what we normally are accustomed to here in Toronto, and I think in that sense is going to make for a really unique neighborhood to live in, a destination to visit. It's incredibly, the document is so thorough as well, and I know there's a lot to do, but I just wanted to start there. So the bridge, we're working on a bridge over a rail corridor, and there are incredible challenges, but also incredible opportunities, given the fact that it has to deal with accessibility. Therefore, it becomes a really long ramp. We know that there's some challenges of maintenance and security on these bridges that we're dealing with. And so I appreciate the opportunity here to kind of just voice my support of the approach. I think it's very straightforward. I truly, I kind of wonder how those plantings are going to be maintained. I just want to say that, but notwithstanding, it is such a unique piece that I think in some ways it should have a competition, and maybe we don't have to be so decide so much today about what it can be or what it should be, that there's opportunities to kind of create wonderful outcomes. It could be an art focus. It reminded me a little bit in some of the imagery of Camden Market in London, where some of these wonderful retail spaces are under the road that goes above, or the train that goes above some of these built forms that become part of that market. So I think that I think that the ramp is well located. I think it's incredibly straightforward. I think it's vital, and so I'm in big support of it. Of course, it could go many ways. It could be masonry, it could be steel, it could be artful, it could be green. And so I think the more that it is unique, I think the more successful it will be. I brought up Block O because, again, just going past these lines that get drawn between employment and mixed use, Block O seems to be at kind of a crux spot in the plan. This idea of this kind of greenway seems to get squeezed at Block O, connecting I think Landing Park, and I'm trying to remember the other park, Hanover Green. And so that's why I was kind of asking, it is this kind of really important block that is a kind of point between three major districts. And so just trying to understand what it is I think vital. And if I was going to just say, if mixed use could just get redrawn and include that to allow for a variety of uses, I mean, I could say it could be the most amazing live work loft building that embraces both living and employment in a small scale, and in its use becomes a transition between employment and residential that is mainly in the village. So I think that some thought should be given to that. I think if not, it might want to move north a little bit so that there's maybe a wider green edge along it that connects the two greens on either side of it. But again, it's, I think, really interesting, exciting opportunity for it. And I kind of love the potential for that unique site and that unique opportunity of what that building could be. I just want to say a little bit about the plaza and the square. For some reason, there's a square and a plaza, and in some ways, there maybe should be switched. The plaza looks more like a square, and the central square looks more like a plaza. And I bring that up just because of scale and inhabitation and animation. I see the plaza as a wonderful little widening of the taxiway, supported by probably coffee shops and restaurants and other maybe retail uses. The central square, I see two pavilionized ends on the built form on the northeast corner, on the northeast side of Street D, which maybe would be a spot for great patios overlooking the central square. But I'm kind of worried about the central square. It's very large, and the rendering, which is great because it shows it at night with this big glass wall, but during the day, especially maybe in inclement weather, it's just a big kind of reflective surface and not much to look at. And so if there is this idea of engagement that I think Emily mentioned, that there's potential for retail, then that has to be part of, I think, an idea about what the square is. If it's a plaza, then there's an opportunity to inhabit maybe the square with another building, maybe a pavilionized restaurant or two that becomes a kind of short, small scale termination to the Taxiway Street terminus, and maybe gives a bit more scale. And I'm just thinking of some of those large green squares in Milan where there are these kind of pavilions sitting, and they actually house restaurants in them, and maybe that can break down the scale of that central square, help to animate it without maybe trusting that something might happen within the hangar building that could help animate it. So I think just the scale of the square maybe is a concern for me. The wonderful kind of accretive built form character is great, and I'm supportive of it. I just have some concerns about some of the odd shapes and inefficiencies of some of the built form. I know it's early on, but just to kind of raise that flag. There's some courtyard buildings, there's some U-shaped buildings. As much as they're great, they become inefficient. And my worry is that they start becoming other kinds of buildings because they start becoming so inefficient that somebody might want to make them more efficient. And I think just to kind of bring that up now so that we're not kind of surprised later on. Lastly, for me, the character of the taxiway is a head scratcher. I mean, the whole notion of a taxiway, the fact that it's so much smaller than the runways, offers an opportunity to really embrace the character of a taxiway. And I just, as much as I appreciate the greening of the taxiway and adding trees and sustainable infrastructure, I kind of miss the kind of potential embracing of the narrative of a taxiway. And maybe there aren't that many trees in that space. And maybe there's another personality for the taxiway that really is unique and embraces the history and I'm going to say the narrative of what was set out of this taxiway that connects, through the next phase to the east. And so I just wonder if more trees can be planted somewhere else and not necessarily in the middle of the taxiway, and the taxiway really becomes a much more, I'm going to say, European kind of experience where trees are not necessarily needed everywhere, and or maybe clumps. But I think the notion is, what does a taxiway, what can it be, what should it be, and then layer on everything else. Otherwise, I mean, there's so many wonderful spaces. I could just imagine. The last point is Street D and the kind of chicane seems a little awkward. I'm a little worried that it might not be safe. Chicanes tend to become challenging for drivers, and again, we don't necessarily want people driving here, but it is an incredibly important connection between the Taxiway Street and Garratt Park, Garratt Boulevard Park. And I think that little connector piece that fronts the square maybe needs to have another look at it to kind of make it a really strong connection between the village and the Ancaster West connection. That one throat just seems kind of resultant of traffic connectivity and not really seen as a kind of potential special connector. That's it. Otherwise, fantastic job.
Great. Thank you, Ralph. I'm going to move on now to Heather.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. And just to echo Ralph's comment, yes, this is a kind of feast for a design review panel receiving a package like this. So thank you. I also very much appreciate that the Taxiway West District has been broken down into further subdivisions. So I think it's great that there are kind of different scales and different aspirations within that. Also commend the team for the degree to which the massing is transitioning to the Ancaster neighborhood. I think that's been very well handled. And then within that, there are these elements that are negotiating this district to others. So Street B at the northeast, Street E, Street D, and Streets J and A, they're all super important. And it would be great to be able to see sections of those streets. I mean, it was great that there was one of the taxiway, but I think many of us would start to wonder, you know, if we could compare the sectional quality of Taxiway Street to Street B. I'm sure you've started thinking about that, but that would be a great next step. I also sort of tend to agree with Ralph that you know, part of people being really excited about this site, as Emily showed at the end of the presentation, is that you just go there now and you just get that sense of you're being so small, you know, and this kind of scaleless quality, and you know, big views of the sky, and maybe the Taxiway Street is actually, you know, less treed, less feeling like a street, and just kind of a very open runway. I think Ralph might be right about that one. I was glad to be reassured that that the Taxiway Street is actually a connector between Nexus Park, Runway East Park, and terminating with the Central Square, because I think it was a bit confused in that presentation. With respect to the bridge, I think it also would have been great to see more of a section through that. I think there are some you know, beginning thoughts here, and it's a big question that we've been asked as a panel. I think that the aspirations with respect to a High Line being a precedent are great. I'm not sure that that's coming through in all of the materials. Like in the rendering on the first page of the package, the bridge supports going into Downsview actually look quite solid, almost like walls in areas. So I would really encourage this bridge to be as much of a suspended ribbon as possible that supports green space. The High Line is successful because it has, you know, afforded a new view of the city, a bit of an exclusive view. And but there are areas that really tie it to the city and things that are kind of further afield. I mean, many of us have been there. There are kind of specific framed views. You know, there's that area that's kind of like an amphitheater that looks down towards the street. Also, being under the High Line is a special place to be as well. So I could imagine that if this were raised and there was a space underneath, there could be, you know, smaller pop-up markets and things that happen, and that could be a whole other scale. Also, I think it's very important, as Gordon mentioned and asked, the roofscapes, the kind of fifth facades of these hangar buildings are going to be very close when you're up on this bridge. So I actually am encouraged by the team's response to that question, because I don't think these roofs have to be necessarily as clean as they appear in the renderings. There could be a kind of, you know, grittiness still about them. But I do think being cognizant of these large roofs being the kind of fifth facades of these buildings is important. If there are skylights that are, you know, being integrated, these could be, you know, beacons of light at night. There might be ways of sort of directing that or holding the light in ways that are quite unique. And if we are being asked to give our opinion on the scenarios on page 32, I do prefer scenario 1, which is the one I think that's being shown in the plan, because I would prioritize the edges of that block and finishing the elevations of Street A. I think it's more important to kind of hold the edges of that with built elements rather than having parking at its edges, which is included as part of those options. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Heather. We're going to move on now to Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just start by echoing what others have said. I mean, this is kind of a feast of clashing grids, and you know, every architect's dream to kind of figure out what to do with the residual bits, and then everyone's got an opinion of how to align or misalign or not align things. And I'm sure you've gone through options 1 to 100 and whatever on those grids, and so here we are to give you another 100 more suggestions on how to do it. But I think my sort of main points really resolve around the kind of question I asked around hierarchy. And I think at this level is where you really start to see the individual spaces and squares and parks and bridges and greenways in detail. And I think some of the work maybe requires a little more resolution around the character of each of those, and start to distinguish between them. You know, we can say one is going to be more green, one is going to be more urban, one will be more pedestrian, and one will be more service oriented, let's say. And I think the parts where I'm struggling a little bit right now is when I look at the taxiway and Street A and then the greenway as these sort of parallel things that want to connect from those centers north and east back to the kind of main district. And there's a bit of competition for attention between all of them, and I don't know that there's an easy resolution. And there's also a bit of understanding it's outside the study area of this work, but complex geometry where Street A crosses the taxiway street, and just understanding what takes precedent and which should drive the thing, and understanding you've got competing interests. So I don't know that I have a simple answer, but I think you need to look at this portion of the taxiway street together with the district to the north and the east as a whole, and understand how the 2 blocks of really kind of intense kind of use that you've got there, which I think actually work well as shown, but how that extends into the other districts and into the sort of central park. I'm going to maybe counter a little bit of what Heather and Ralph said. I don't mind the taxiway being green. I think you've got the runway to be the big wide open space at scale. It's the thing that follows the ridge of the landscape and probably has the view to the skyline. This is very much the taxiway is the secondary thing, and I think it can be of a different character. And I think trees or whatever you're working with around that kind of finer grain retail may be appropriate here. But but I do think what you need to understand also is how it connects back to the hangars and how that kind of sequence of walking goes into the central park and then into the hangars. And you almost want to see a bit of a Noli plan with the kind of internal street inside the hangars, and where does that terminate at the parking garage, and how that then goes through the square across the street into the taxiway street and so on, because it really will work as an interconnected string of public spaces. What else do I got here? I think your instinct to put the structured parking at the rail corridor may not be the right idea, and I'd sort of question that for a second, because I think what it's doing is it's encouraging everyone that's arriving by car to pass through your village. You have to drive across the various pedestrian kind of small scale fine grained spaces to park and then come back walking. And maybe there are ways to move one, if not both of those parking garages a little further away so that the cars get intercepted sooner. And I'm really tempted to just run up a new street through the works yard to the south and have that be your back door that lets cars in. And so maybe if there's anyone at the city that's willing to kind of sell that works yard, I think it'd be great. But I think what I'm getting at is that there are some conflicts again between the service and that kind of pedestrian function that I think just need to get refined as you work through this. Flipping over to the bridge, my sense is that this thing is big enough and long enough that it may not have a single character. It may, as it's rendered right now, it's a kind of picturesque landform with a curving sort of path that meanders up as you go up. But it also seems like something that's hemmed in. And so from a kind of septet and even just access perspective, it seems a little constricting. It works if you're moving from the taxiway up and over the bridge, but if there's people along the way from the parking garage or other places, they may want to find access points, whether it's via elevators or to second or third levels or stairs that can provide some different access points. And the one I keep going back to is the Paris example of the viaducts behind the Bastille that are the old train viaduct that was done up in the 80s. And it has this really incredible collection of stairs, ramps, elevators, bridges. There's a second level IKEA that works off of it. Like, you've got literally anything and everything. And maybe the first portion of the bridge is actually a robust embankment structure with the kind of retail spaces that I think Heather was talking about, buried in the arches of a stone thing. And then it changes to a lighter weight thing as you sail up and over the bridge. It can be a finer thing that's a suspension bridge or something like that. So I think maybe there isn't a single answer of what it needs to be, and it could respond along its couple hundred meters length. And I'll just leave it at that. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We're going to move on next to Jim and then Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for the presentation. Just a few comments from me. I think a lot of people have said a number of things that I agree with already. Just to go on about the bridge, since it seems to be one of the key questions, I would certainly support seeing other uses under the bridge where they fit, public washrooms, bike parking, or as I saw last year in Berlin, a lovely seedy after hours dance club. That's what this neighborhood could use. I think also the bridge is fairly long, so I think a solar canopy on the bridge would really make it much more pleasant to cross. And also in the same vein, weather protection against those cold northern winds. So both of those initiatives, I think, would make the bridge much more pedestrian supportive. And so that, I think, has a bigger impact across the entire development area in encouraging people to keep walking in Four Seasons. And outside of the questions you've posed, but given that there are some large areas that are proposed to be dedicated parking, I would also suggest considering solar canopies over the parking lots. They certainly have a number of environmental benefits, and they would fit within the corporate commitment to sustainability that I see here, given that you're proposing to adhere to Tier 2 of the Green Standard, which I think is certainly to be applauded wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And last but not least, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going to get back to my list of the questions. Oh, here we go. I guess the first thing to say is to echo what others have said. Beautifully illustrated arguments about an extraordinary landscape where the foundational geometry of the site hasn't been blurred, it's been enjoyed and amplified. And so much that we see in projects that come before us, the opportunities for creating a rich landscape seem to be ignored. Not so here, and that's, I think, it's provided a major source of enjoyment and delight in reviewing the package and appreciating what the urban environment and the village environment will be. So on the subject of the bridge, I was just thinking about the width of the Gardner right now, and I'm going to guess that it's 6 lanes wide, and I'm going to guess that each lane is, something in the order of 3 meters, probably a little bit more. That's 18 meters wide, and what's being proposed here is wider than that. And I wonder about whether a successful bridge needs to have that singular character and width in order to be successful. And I think I heard a few other contributors say, well, maybe it has multiple characters. So I would wonder about that. We know, from the Bentway and from Borough Market, that there's a lot of ways of occupying the undersides of wider bridges. But I would say that the first question for me is, does it have to be that wide to accommodate the populations we're talking about? Is 6 meters, plus all of the acknowledgements of delight on its edges and in its center? Is 6 meters enough? Is 10 meters enough? I would bring that question forward and imagine it being many things. It's 284 meters long, so it's got a lot of opportunity to transform along its length. I also support previous comments about multiple kinds of access. Yes, a long, gentle 4% or 5% slope is the definition of accessibility, but I would also wonder about the kinds of distances that you'd be willing to travel before you would want to go backwards to where you started from and be able to get down, as is shown in the High Line with the number of stairs and elevators that come every couple of blocks along its trajectory. So I would think consider that. If width is something that is desired to be explored, generous openings for light, for interpenetration of the plantings from below and events above, have it be a sort of a perforated landscape would be one way of managing the width and its length. And in those perforations, maybe other opportunities for reconnecting. As it's going up, you get very close to the parking structures, and you could wonder, is there a way to connect to the parking structures as well and have it be a main source? And then you wonder about a whole landscape of connectivity between those two. Maybe that's complicating things, but they're right there, and you're up at probably the 3rd or the 4th floor of the parking structure. So something worth considering. So, and as I said, avoiding a dead end and understanding the trajectory of construction and phasing, making sure that it has a life on its own before it crosses the tracks and its completion across the tracks, obviously, taking away a lot of that issue. The subject of Street A, I mean, I think, and the parks along and the pops and greenways along Street A, I think when I look at the planning, there's a building, and let me see if I can find a drawing that will get me there. In your key plan on page 3 of our package, there's a building on the north side of Landing Park, and it's fitting into the space defined by Street B and Street A, and obviously it's a termination of Downsview Bridge Park. That piece seems to constrict the continuity of a more generous greenway, and I have to admit that it's a bit difficult to appreciate the scale of the drawings. There's so much going on, and even the bridge that we were talking about and its width in that scale, I could be underappreciating the space to the south of that little building, but it also seems quite close to the North Hangars. So I wonder about the opportunity to look more carefully at the building just north of Landing Park, so that a more generous continuity of a greenway between Landing Park and Hanover Park is something that could be considered more strongly. And going back to the questions, with respect to the interface of new development adjacent to the East-West Greenway, I think I've suggested maybe there's a little more generosity, but one of the things that is probably too early in the project, which is the numbers of street sections that would help us understand what's anticipated in terms of the defining widths and heights of all those spaces. Certainly in the visualizations you've provided, we know that they're headed in a very good direction, but in order for us to provide maybe better commentary on that, that would be something that would help us. And finally, Taxiway Street, it's taken me a while to fully understand maybe the primary road network that, as I see it, which is the combination of Garratt Boulevard, Street D, and Street A running through the site, and then a kind of an island of smaller, more village-like pedestrian streets captured by that. And if it were a more conventional layout, Street D and Street A would be the primary, and Taxiway Street would be a service wooner, let's say. And when I see it that way, I can sort of understand the hierarchy of streets. So that helps me be able to see it in a maybe oversimplified way. But it definitely helps me. So on the subject of the character of Taxiway Street, I would say, similar to a couple of my colleagues, one of the things that if you've visited the site, one appreciates are the vast scales of dimension here without trees, and understandably that can't be its final condition. And I know there are more opportunities to fulfill that experience on the runways, but I wonder about the very first phase being able to capture that the edges, animated edges of the street, and something about the vast scale, the character of the taxiway in this first phase. It is an opportunity to describe the future character and maybe capture some of it here. I'm gonna pause there, Mr. Chair. I think those are my comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we hold the vote, I think it's worth just sort of summarizing some of the things that were said, and I'm not going to go into them in detail except for one thing. I know that you've certainly, at a high-level summary, you've heard a lot of comments about site plan, about block shapes, street widths. Some comments have come through regarding some of the eccentric angular connections, whether that needs more effort to make sure that the built form and the blocks actually work well. Given that sometimes an irregular block can add immeasurable character to a neighborhood. certainly lots of comments about the goodness that we see shown as a potential to us of this project. We don't often, I may even say hardly ever, see a development where the heights of the buildings are what they should be. And that there is a serious contemplation about the quality of the public realm to a very high degree. And then moving on into the comments about sustainability and reusing existing buildings, that we have not seen hangars in other projects, but we've seen other older buildings that should stay in a development because they add so much character. And it makes it so much easier to say we have something authentic here instead of having to manufacture it. But you've taken great care to make those hangars and some of the other buildings part of the character of this neighborhood. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Certainly, there were lots of conversations, lots of comments at the beginning about how unique this is, how aspirational it is, how exciting, which means that we will be looking forward to seeing this move forward very much in the way, the character and the height and the density that you've already identified. And again, we have seen projects in the past that start off with great promise. When they come back, that promise has been overtaken by other considerations. The thing I was just going to focus on just for a couple of minutes, and that is this notion of working with a heritage context. And we've seen sites that used to be giant cookie factories. We've seen sites that used to play a major role in bringing in the tech age. And quite often it's very difficult. Sometimes it's very easy to make use of the character that's the heritage and insert it and move it into an urbane environment. But airports are not urbane. Taxiways are not urbane. Hangars are not urbane, although you're going to make them much more than they ever were before. And how to create that sense of authenticity in terms of calling something Taxiway Street, and how do you actually, if you use it as a taxiway, it's the antithesis of an urban or an urbane street. So there's more care. You've already taken great care. You've got the names, you've got the buildings, and now it is how do you carry it through so that it doesn't feel like it's a pastiche. And I'm not saying that it is right now, but how do you reconcile a heritage that is not of an urban environment and make it fascinating? And maybe coming back to the bridge for a second, where maybe it is a homage to the wondrous aeronautical shapes that engineers created, the shaping of airplanes, the shaping of the wings, how they defy gravity. That may be the thing that makes your bridge, your link that runs all the way through from east to west, to be something that is, I guess, like an airplane, otherworldly and shaped in a different way. And that might give you the inspiration in terms of treating that bridge differently. And picking up on the comment about, well, if you're up high, which is all about planes, you could take that entire width and then feather off some parts of that width of the bridge, and maybe parts of it goes to the roof of the north hangar, or it goes across to the roof of the south hangar, or goes across, as Michael was saying, into the parking garage. That kind of next step, that where you interpret the aeronautical world, can work to your advantage and counterbalance some of the big muscular moves of having big hangars. So that said, I think this is an amazing project, and we're looking forward to it coming back. Now we're going to move on to the vote. And if Leanne could put the vote up. Panel members, you know this is a first review. There is a vote of support and a vote of non-support. Sometimes a vote of support can be with certain key conditions attached to it, so that it's like a conditional vote. But typically, if there are too many key conditions, it becomes essentially the minutes that the proponent team will receive. So I'm going to first of all ask if any panel members see any condition to the vote of support. I don't see anybody raising hands. And what we're doing as part of the quorum voting today, all panel members, including myself, will be voting. So I will go through with the each person, each panel member, and just to ask whether you vote for support or non-support. I will start with Heather.
Support.
Thank you. Michael.
Support.
Thank you. Jim.
Support.
Thank you, Jim. Paul. Thank you. Have I missed any of the panel members? No. And I would also be voting for support. So voted. Thank you very much to the proponent team. You've set a high bar. We're looking for that to continue when we see it next. Congratulations. Okay, that ends our session today. Good afternoon, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.